So somebody mentioned on Facebook about turning black-eyed peas into soup. Now, every year I force myself to eat 4 black-eyed peas for New Year's. I don't actually like the taste of them. It's not that they're like too earthy or too beany. I don't know what it is about black-eyed peas. I just don't really care for them. So, my grandmother got me a new soup pan, soup pot, whatever. So I figure let's make soup and see if I will finally like black-eyed peas. I don't have high hopes for this, but I do have a bunch of random leftovers that we can put in the soup. So let's kind of make it up as we go along and see how it works out. So I've got some pre-cooked chicken. It's kind of big, so I'll probably chop it up. I got some leftover cornbread, the zucchini cornbread we made the other day. I've got a bunch of chicken broth. Now, these are chicken broth that I put in a ice cube tray. Now, each individual ice cube can vary a little bit, but on average, it's about 1 ounce. So you would need about 8 ice cubes to make about 8 ounces or a cup of chicken broth. I've also got some celery that's kind of on its last legs, so I should probably go ahead and chop it up. And whatever I don't use for the soup, I'm going to go ahead and freeze it for later. I got some diced tomatoes with chili because I figure we're going to go for more of like a taco soup, and we need a little bit of spice. I've got a can of corn because that goes well. Of course, my can of black-eyed peas. And then I've got some leftover wild rice. Now, you could use whatever rice you like. I just happen to have that left over, so let's use it. So let's get to figuring out how we're going to make this. So I'm thinking we've got about 2 cups of chicken broth here. So I'm just going to go ahead and dump it in my sauce pot and let that melt. So we'll let that melt while we're doing everything else. Now, I know that this is kind of big chunks, okay? And I don't know about you, but I don't really want huge chunks. Now, another good option that I was thinking about was doing sausage. I have a bunch of sausage. And I even have some like spicy sausage that would probably work really well for this. Now, you may be saying this isn't a whole bunch of chicken, and it's not, but it just happened to be chicken that I cooked and that I just didn't get around. Oh, that one's a tough one. Just didn't get around to using before I thought it was safe. So what I do is if I don't think I'm going to eat it, I just go ahead and throw it in the freezer. Now, the freezer doesn't really stop the clock, but it does extend the clock on a lot of things. Now, could I have set this out on the counter and made it a little bit easier to chop up? Sure. But you know what? When you're just throwing stuff together, you don't always think ahead. So now I would tell myself later that, hey, I probably should have thrown that on the counter. But you know what? It's fine. There we go. We got a nice little rough chop. And you know what? It's still pretty frozen. So we're just going to go ahead and throw it in with our frozen ice cubes because it's going to melt, right? Now, typically for corn, I don't really like rinse and drain it. But for beans, always rinse and drain. So let me go ahead and take care of that. So we are back. Now, all I've done is washed my my celery and gotten it. Now, I did cut off the end and a little bit of the top part, and I'll save that for I have a bag in my freezer where I put all of my scraps in it, so the next time that I make chicken broth, I can add some flavor there. And then as far as, I'm thinking, we're not making a gigantic pot of soup, so I'm thinking we will just need like 2 ribs maybe, and I'm just doing a quick dice. Now, if I had onions and carrots, I could definitely go ahead and do that first in the pot and get them all tender. But you know what? This is going to be one of those soups where everything is going to chill out and boil for a while. And celery, to me, doesn't make a huge difference if you kind of saute it, if you will. To me, the majority of the time, you just need it to really just boil long enough to not be so tough, if you will. Now, one thing that I really, really like to add to soup, okay? A lot of people throw away the top part, the leaves, okay? But there's actually a lot of flavor in the leaves, okay? So I like to go ahead and just give it like a nice quick mince. You don't have to roll it like if you were doing basil leaves or anything, but just give it some nice little chop. I don't go for perfect. I was actually in culinary school, and I think that's part of the reason why I don't go for perfect anymore. Because if you've ever been to culinary school, that's what they want. They want everything to look perfect. But you know what? My kids don't care if it's perfect. They just don't. And you know what? It still tastes exactly the same. So now I did go ahead and rinse my black-eyed peas and my corn. I just went ahead and mixed it together. Like I said, I don't usually rinse the corn part, but I figured I did need to drain it, so might as well put it all in the same colander. Now, let me show you guys what this looks like so far. So far, we're looking pretty good. We got a bunch of vegetables, we got our beans, and we've got a little bit of liquid. We are probably going to need some more. So I'm going to add, this is right at 4 cups of water, and I've just got this over medium heat while we throw everything in. Now, one of the things that we're going to throw in to give it a little bit of spice is we're going to throw in, we've got a can of the tomatoes and the chilies. And like I said, I don't actually I don't drain those or anything. So it's going to give kind of a nice look. Seasonings go, I was kind of going for like a taco type seasoning. So I've got some taco seasoning. Now, the thing with soup is that you can always add more seasoning, but it's a little difficult to add less later. And especially if your seasoning is salty, which most taco seasoning is pretty salty. If I make my own, I tend to keep out a lot of that. This is Italian seasoning. That's from last night. That is not what I was expecting. Here we go. We'll do pepper. So just do a couple swigs of pepper, because as we go, we will actually continue to taste it and continue to season it as needed. I'm going to hold off on the salt just yet because chicken broth can be salty. Chicken itself can be salty. Some of the canned vegetables can be salty. I try to pick the low sodium options when possible. So you know what? I'm not ready to commit to more salt just yet. So we are going to bring this up to a boil, and then we're just going to let it simmer for about 20 minutes, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so some time has elapsed. I've cleaned up, I've gone ahead and chopped up all my celery so it's ready to go in the freezer. I can hear my soup pot, it's starting to bubble. So people ask me all the time, like, how do you create recipes? Like, how do you make these things? So one of the things that I did learn in culinary school that I will never, be able to thank them enough for is learning how certain food works, like how it creates stuff, how it makes something different. And when you're cooking, it's basically like coming to a bunch of different roadblocks. Okay. So at this point, our soup is now boiling. Okay. Everything is melding together and it is just becoming nice, happy soup. But in a few minutes here, we're going to double check this, and then we've got a decision to make. Do we want a thick soup similar to like a chili, or do we want more of a brothy soup, which would be more of like a minestrone? Because from that point, we kind of decide which direction we go. If we want a thicker soup, then we're going to have to figure out how are we going to take all this liquid in this pan and make it thicker. Well, we can just let it boil off and it'll naturally evaporate, or we can add something to it to thicken it. There's a zillion different things you can add to thicken soup. One of my favorites is adding like cream cheese. It gives it that creamy factor while also thickening it up. So we've got a couple options there, and I'm going to think on that on how we're going to do this, because I still haven't decided if we're going to do a thin or a thick soup. Now, another thing is that when you're going to add a starch like this wild rice that's already cooked, if this was uncooked rice, I could add it more at the beginning because it's going to take about 15 to 20 minutes to cook. But since this is already cooked, it is at the point where every single one of those grains of rice is like little sponges. and they would actually soak up the majority of my liquid. So that right there is actually an option to thicken up my soup, and it would actually make my rice very, very heavy. It would like think of like a heavy wet sponge. That's what my rice would turn into, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So as I'm trying something out for the first time, I look at tons of recipes and I try to figure out why they're adding certain ingredients. And one of my biggest complaints about a lot of food bloggers is I feel like they're getting paid by the ingredient, because I see these recipes that have 42 different ingredients and I'm like, it doesn't need to be that much. So you'll notice a lot of my recipes are actually very small as far as ingredient lists, because I think of what each item is going to do for that dish. So let's check out our soup real quick. Okay, we are definitely boiling, so that's good. Now I'm going to lower the heat and let this reduce, and I'm going to figure out what kind of soup that we're going to make. So now let's take a look at our soup, okay? Yeah, it's a little steamy, it's a little hot in there, okay? You can see all of our really, really lovely vegetables. Okay, so at this point, I've decided that I do want to go ahead and add in my wild rice, because we're going to let that kind of soak up everything. Now, I've been looking at a ton of recipes, and I saw a couple that were labeled as like Hopping John soup. So I don't know if you would call that this, but I'm going to call it taco black-eyed pea soup. So now let's think of what are we going to top our soup with. Now, there's plenty of soups, chicken noodle, for instance, that you don't need to top it with anything. You can literally just eat it as is, and that's fine. We could eat this soup as is as well. But I really like to add toppings. So we pour our soup in the bowl when it's ready, and then we can add some cheese. I've got some sour cream. I've got some leftover Halloween tortilla chips that we can just squish up. If you didn't have tortilla chips, you know, I've got some croutons. I have an avocado that looks like it is just about ripe, and I think avocado goes really good on top of soup. So I think what we're going to do, this sour cream is getting pretty close to date. So I think we're actually going to make this more of like a creamy taco soup. And once I start seeing that the rice has started to soak up some stuff, I'm going to actually add the rest of this sour cream, which looks to be about half a cup to 3/4 of a cup, to my soup to give it some thickness and some creaminess. And then we'll check the seasonings on it. Okay, so we're back and we have our soup and it's looking awesome. It smells awesome. But, oh, wait a minute. Before I put the soup in here, I have leftover cornbread from the other night. And I don't know if you guys do this, but I just kind of break it up at the bottom. Give it kind of like a base, if you will. Okay. And this will kind of thicken it up as well. I mean, it did thicken up a good amount. And now I've got like cornbread thumbs. Okay, got my cornbread thumbs out of the way. Okay, so now we're gonna pour our soup over that, and the cornbread's going to absorb all that extra liquid. Oh my goodness. And it's actually quite colorful because it's got the green and the red and the yellow. And then for more color, I got purple and orange tortilla chips. So we'll just crunch that on top. Now, normally I would add some cheese, and I really like this thick cut style cheese, but you know what? I'm thinking it might not need that. So we're just going to top it off with a little bit of avocado. And then let's give this a try. Let's mix this up a little bit and let's see how it is. I've got a bite here that's got, oh, let's see here. I've got all 4 of my black-eyed peas right here. So let's see. Do I actually like black-eyed peas in soup? You know what? I can't even really taste the black-eyed peas. So I would consider this one a win because I'll easily eat this whole bowl, no problem. Whereas before, I probably took the black-eyed peas one by one like a pill that had to go down. Didn't really enjoy it much. So I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me while we threw together some soup and made it up as we came along. So Have a wonderful day. I'll see you later. Bye.